In the neighborhood where conformity was disguised as beauty, each house stood in quiet obedience to rules that had been passed down, rewritten, and enforced with clipboard precision. Beige, gray, pale blue, and muted white stretched down the block like a pattern carefully arranged on a spreadsheet. The lawns were clipped evenly, trimmed at exactly the same height, and even flower beds were limited to natural tones, as if the very idea of vibrancy threatened the established order. For years, no one had dared to push too far against these unspoken walls, because every household feared the board, and more specifically, Karen. Karen was not on the official homeowners board, but everyone understood she was its shadow backbone. She was the loudest voice at every meeting, the most aggressive at enforcing the bylaws, and the first to send long, furious emails if anything looked out of place. Her beige house, with its straight shutters and white door, was the model of what she believed every other property should look like. To her, uniformity was control, and control was peace. Into this sea of sameness came one house that dared to be a little different. Not wildly, not outrageously, but simply painted in a slightly brighter yellow than the others. It was cheerful rather than bland, sunshine-colored rather than sand-colored. Children liked it, neighbors smiled as they passed, and even delivery drivers said it was easier to spot. But Karen hated it. To her, the brightness was an assault, a defiance, a refusal to blend in like the rest. At first, she complained casually, suggesting the homeowner tone it down. When ignored, she escalated. She brought it up in meetings, pointing at color swatches and citing obscure clauses about excessive vibrancy. Soon, letters followed, not just suggesting, but demanding compliance. Each letter grew sterner, layered with threats of fines and citations. The homeowner, however, did not bow. Instead of retreating, he began to consider the absurdity of it all. Why should one person's preference for dullness dictate an entire community? Why should joy be censored because a neighbor found it too much? What began as irritation grew into resolve. The thought process became a quiet rebellion. If the house was already too colorful for Karen, why not make it truly colorful? If she wanted conformity, why not embrace the opposite? An explosion of character that could never be mistaken for blandness again. One day, scaffolding went up. Buckets of paint arrived, not in shades of taupe or cream, but in the vibrant primaries and pastels of cartoons. At first, neighbors assumed it was just maintenance, but as days passed, outlines began to appear, sketches traced on the siding like a mural coming to life. A pair of big eyes, a wide smile, and a square outline that looked suspiciously familiar. Karen's daily walks became storms of outrage. She muttered under her breath, stomped her shoes harder on the pavement, and sent emails filled with phrases like absolute abomination and neighborhood disgrace. But nothing stopped the transformation. As the work continued, the house became brighter, louder, more unapologetically unique. By the end of the first week, what once was a sunshine yellow house had transformed into something extraordinary. The siding had become the face of SpongeBob SquarePants, complete with blue eyes, wide grin, and freckles. The garage door resembled his pants, brown with a red tie painted across. Even the trim had been stylized to match the cartoon's playful design. Children gasped with delight as they walked by. Cars slowed to a crawl, passengers leaning out with phones to snap photos. Neighbors whispered in shock, some amused, others appalled, but none indifferent. The house had become impossible to ignore. Karen, however, was livid. She claimed it was an attack on her, a deliberate mockery of her insistence on less color. To her, it wasn't just a paint job, it was war. The HOA board, overwhelmed by her fury, scrambled to respond. Letters doubled, threats escalated, and emergency meetings were called. But by then the battle had shifted beyond the quiet suburban street. Pictures of the SpongeBob house leaked online. Social media posts with captions like, "This HOA demanded less color, so he gave them this," began to circulate. Each share multiplied the audience, and within days the house was not just a local scandal but a viral sensation. The homeowner had not intended for global attention, but it arrived nonetheless. News outlets began to call, reporters knocked on the door, and influencers stopped by for photos. Children begged their parents to drive past it, and cars lined up just to take selfies, with the cheerful yellow face grinning over the yard. What began as a complaint about being too colorful had now become a worldwide attraction. The HOA, once so powerful, suddenly looked small against the tidal wave of attention, and Karen, whose mission was to silence one shade of yellow, now faced an entire house that had become the loudest, brightest statement possible. The first chapter of this battle ended with the house standing tall, grinning across the neighborhood, daring anyone to try to erase it. What came next, however, would test the limits of control, defiance, and the very definition of community. As the SpongeBob house gained attention, the neighborhood transformed into something entirely new. What had once been a quiet cul-de-sac of conformity became a destination. Families drove from other towns, sometimes waiting in lines of cars just to snap photos. Children squealed with excitement when they saw the giant cartoon face staring at them, and parents laughed at the absurdity of it all. Social media platforms flooded with pictures, TikToks, and reaction videos. The house had become a symbol of rebellion, humor, and joy all at once. Karen's fury, however, grew in equal measure. She viewed every passing car, every laughing child, and every camera as a personal attack. What was once her perfect neighborhood of control had become a carnival of chaos. She doubled her efforts, demanding the HOA shut it down, calling local authorities and even trying to contact city officials. But the city, overwhelmed with more pressing concerns, shrugged. As long as the house was structurally sound and not breaking zoning laws, there was little they could do. The homeowner, meanwhile, embraced the role thrust upon him. At first, the attention was overwhelming, but soon he saw opportunity. If the house was now a landmark, why not lean into it further? He began decorating the yard with SpongeBob-themed accessories, a pineapple mailbox, painted rocks shaped like jellyfish, and even a small wooden replica of Squidward's house. Children loved it, neighbors started to relax into it, and even some of the board members admitted, quietly, that it was good for the community's visibility. But Karen refused to relent. She organized petitions, staged rants at meetings, and sent furious letters to anyone who would read them. The more she fought, however, the less power she seemed to hold. Each attempt to shut it down only fueled more attention. Journalists quoted her complaints, turning her into the face of humorless control, while the SpongeBob house became the hero of harmless rebellion. National media picked up the story. Television crews filmed segments, framing it as a clash between joy and control, individuality and conformity. The SpongeBob house became a backdrop for debates about freedom of expression. Tour buses added it to their routes, pulling up to let tourists snap selfies. Even merchandise appeared online, T-shirts, mugs, and stickers featuring the cartoon face with slogans like, "Too colorful for Karen." By midsummer, the house wasn't just famous, it was legendary. Businesses nearby saw more traffic, with coffee shops and diners benefiting from the influx of visitors. The community, once wary, began to embrace the attention. Some homeowners even started painting brighter doors or planting more colorful flowers, emboldened by the example. But Karen's wrath had not faded. If anything, it deepened into obsession. She viewed every success as her failure, every laughing child as proof that her authority was crumbling. She filed formal complaints, threatened lawsuits, and even attempted to sue for emotional damages. None succeeded. Each defeat only magnified her frustration, and each spinning news camera made her feel smaller. For the homeowner, the attention had shifted from defense to celebration. What began as resistance had blossomed into a cultural moment, one that showed no signs of slowing. Yet beneath the laughter and applause, tension simmered. Karen was not finished. She still had influence, still had allies, and still believed she could reclaim the neighborhood. The second chapter closed with the SpongeBob house at the peak of its fame, lights glowing at night, crowds gathered at its fence, and cameras flashing. The stage was set not just for a neighborhood squabble, but for a showdown that would decide whether individuality could truly triumph over control. As the months rolled on, the SpongeBob house became more than a novelty. It had grown into a cultural icon, a story people told when they spoke about the absurdity of rules clashing with human creativity. The homeowner had gone from anonymous resident to local celebrity, receiving invitations to festivals, interviews, and even art shows. What Karen had once called an abomination was now celebrated as public art. But Karen refused to give up. With her grip on the HOA slipping, she pursued more extreme measures. She called for emergency meetings, begged for intervention from county officials, and even launched a personal campaign to shame the homeowner. But her efforts increasingly backfired. Each rant she delivered was filmed, shared online, and mocked endlessly. She had unintentionally become a villain in the story she thought she was controlling. Meanwhile, the homeowner continued to expand the project. Halloween brought a SpongeBob-themed haunted house with lights, props, and costumed volunteers. Christmas saw the house wrapped in holiday decorations, styled to fit Bikini Bottom. Every season brought new reasons for people to visit, and with each event the house's reputation only grew. Neighbors, once cautious, leaned into the spectacle. They set up lemonade stands, parking spaces, and even small crafts to sell to tourists. The neighborhood that had once prided itself on uniformity now thrived on uniqueness. Karen, watching from her beige fortress, saw her vision crumble piece by piece. Karen's final defeat was not loud or dramatic, but quiet. She stopped attending meetings, stopped sending letters, and stopped patrolling with her clipboard. Her reign of control ended not with a victory, but with silence. The neighborhood had moved on, leaving her behind. The SpongeBob house, meanwhile, lived on. It became a destination not just for photos, but for inspiration. People saw it as proof that individuality could triumph, that joy could outlast rules, and that even the strictest HOA could not silence creativity. In the end, the story was no longer about a feud, but about a legacy. A house painted in bright cartoon colors stood as a monument to defiance, laughter, and freedom. It reminded everyone who passed that sometimes the boldest statement comes from refusing to blend in. And so the tale closed with SpongeBob grinning across the neighborhood, his wide cartoon smile watching over a community that had once feared color, but now thrived in it.